Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. I'm Greg Hunter. Thanks for joining us today. With us, a guest that we should have on a lot more, and we've had him on before. We're talking about Professor William Black. William Black, thank you for joining us today on USA Watchdog.
Thank you.
Of course, you're a professor of economics, a professor of law, a specialist in white-collar crime, a former RTC regulator. You know all about the financial, legal world, and I'm so glad to have you on. I want to start with what the president said last week about him revamping the tools that they have to spy on people. There is one good thing about Edward Snowden, and it started a national debate. But to the president's credit, he did say, hey, listen, they don't expect China or Russia to have open debates about their surveillance system on their own people or any other people. What's your assertion of your assessment of what the president said and what he's revamping?
Well, first, we didn't have open debate either. We had a bunch of lies about our system, and it's only because of Snowden's disclosures that we know more and have this debate. So I'm not sure we're quite so different on those things. We think, vastly superior technology in the form of the NSA compared to any rival, by the way, including Russia and China, though China may be catching up. So the NSA probably intercepts somewhere in the order of 50,000 documents compared for every one document that foreign intelligence services collect. So we are the story internationally, and we're the story internationally that it turns out was not just spying on terrorists. We were spying on the general population of the world. We were spying on friendly foreign governments, and we were targeting journalists all over the world as well. And we used the intelligence we were gathering against journalists to try to discourage whistleblowers from coming forward. So, we're pretty darn bad, and we have it's true, we're the only ones that have something like a FISA court that you have to go through. But, that's largely a matter of form because FISA basically rubber stamps virtually everything. And indeed, one of the remarkable things that came out from Snowden is even though the FISA court does rubber stamp almost everything, NSA still doesn't want to have anything to do with it, and the FBI, and they want exceptions. And a number of those exceptions have been preserved, even under the new reform package that President Obama announced last week. So the FBI can still go secretly to folks without ever going to court and get private entities that you use and we use for communications to turn over records, and you'll never know that it happened unless and until the FBI agents then come knocking at your door, perhaps. So
having a privacy advocate, one of the things that he was going to have, a privacy advocate on the FISA court, you're saying that they'll just bypass that. When they really don't want anybody to know what they're doing, they'll just ask for an exemption and then wouldn't even go to court.
Well, it's a good thing to have a privacy advocate because that's been one of the problems with FISA, is that it's completely one-sided. But it's worse than that. FISA judges are selected by the Supreme Court justices who've been exceptionally conservative, and they have removed FISA judges whenever they said no to the administration. Now, this is years in the past, but FISA was inherently structured to give the pretense that there were protections. It's form only. It's never been substance. And as I said, even that isn't enough for the NSA and the FBI. And so they continue to have very large exemptions from ever having to go through FISA, and that will continue under the new rules.
So you're saying that this speech is really a bunch of flag waving, and the NSA is really your neighbor and your families, and really it's patriotic, but we are going to do some stuff with massive data collection and transfer it off to a third party source eventually. You're saying that that's okay, something, but not much.
Yeah, and it tells you really the politics of the thing, that they decided they had to do something politically to curtail this because they're getting terrible publicity. And they're getting terrible publicity not just to the United States, but of course you get scandal after scandal that they went after friendly governments in Brazil and such. And you can imagine what the media and the governments do in a place like Brazil. So we have turned this thing into a disaster in terms of public relations for the United States and in terms of diplomatic relations. And there's no evidence that we ever gained anything useful by spying on, the head of state of Brazil or Germany and such. And no one seriously suggests that was for anti-terrorist purposes. And it's a type of thing that whatever the gains were, and presumably we wanted an advantage in bilateral negotiations on things like trade deals or such. Anyway, any gains they got there have been more than outweighed by enraging many foreign leaders and the populace of many nations against the United States.
And one of the things I wrote down in my notes, I watched the speech, last Friday, and I just wrote, why are they doing this? And you hit on something really political. And I just wrote young people. I bet you young people are like, hey, I have a smartphone, but I don't want you to, government to look at my, me setting up a date with, my girlfriend or me, meeting for, drinks after work or whatever. So I think young people, I think this is a big negative, big downer for young people, don't you think?
Yeah, we've already had as a major mem in, all kinds of television dramas and movies, the idea that the government could track everything you do. And that was never true until Snowden revealed that it's, while it isn't that level of the movies, it's unfortunately not that far behind. And of course, the technology is developing at a very rapid rate. So you're right. When you we have 3 kids, our kids assume that the NSA listens to everything they do. I'm not sure that's true, but that's their assumption.
That's a sad statement on our democracy.
We have given that, and that's one of the things that's really disturbing about this is, you don't need evil people. The NSA, as far as we know, was not engaged in some grand conspiracy to stage a coup d'etat or, like the old days of J. Edgar Hoover, where he always getting files on politicians so that he could extort them to do what they wanted, and that's how he stayed in office for so long. It doesn't appear that the NSA was involved in all that. It's just this insatiable desire. Hey, if we can have the technology, of course we should grab more, and we should always grab more. And just no mindset that really democracy or privacy had any value.
Well, let's at least call it a step in the right direction. I want to move on to another thing. You wrote an article out last week about Jamie Dimon, one of my favorite people, and I just want to set you up here. And I had this a couple of weeks ago on my weekly news wrap-up. Just in the last year, within the llast year, he had the London whale trade. He said it was $2 billion. It was really $6.2 billion. They piled on another $1 billion or more on let's just call it $7 billion just for that little debacle. We had the foreclosure fraud, mishandling of mortgages, but they still have criminal charges that could be pending, $13 billion. Add that to the $2.5 billion, more than $2.5 billion that they wrote a check for, and it was widely reported that they about $1.7 billion was to satisfy criminal charges. I bet you Bernie Madoff would have loved to have gotten his checkbook out and written a check as opposed to spending the rest of his life in jail. But all told, this is nearly $23 billion. Just these 3 things with fines, restitution, and trading losses, just those 3 things. How does Jamie Dimon have a job? And they still are facing criminal charges. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I wrote a piece last week about this. What would it take to get Andrew Ross Sorkin, who's the New York Times reporter who runs their whole deal book outfit that reports on Wall Street, to call for Jamie Dimon's resignation? Instead, what Andrew Ross Sorkin has done is a piece that says, bitterly criticizes anybody calling for Diamond to be fired, saying that this is obscene bloodlust and that we're using Diamond as a piñata. And they're quoting Daniel Loeb, the hedge fund guy that hates Obama with a purple passion. He used to be an Obama supporter and he changed and such. So the idea is not only is the New York Times deal book, the leading alleged paper of record in America with expertise on finance, not calling for Diamond to leave. It says that anybody that criticizes Diamond is engaged in some kind of crazed bloodlust, a desire for a pogrom and such. It's completely insane.
I wanted to put a finer point on that. You realize that they could have bought Dell Computer for the money they lost. They got it could have come $23 billion to take Dell Computer private, roughly.
Well,
this is a large sum of money by a very big financial institution, which is still facing criminal charge. They wrote a check to satisfy some of the criminal charges, and they still are facing criminal charges. Isn't that a legitimate criticism out here in the media world?
Well, where to begin? Let's start with the bottom line and then go through the details. Jamie Dimon has presided over the largest financial crime spree in world history, right? If you go into J.P. Morgan's annual statements, the 10K, it takes over 10 pages to describe their legal problems. If you go on to DealBook, which has a graphic of the J.P. Dimon cases, it takes page after page to be able to just go through and terse two-sentence descriptions all of their things. It depends a little bit on how you count it, but it is over a dozen and more in the range of 15 major felonies that either the United States investigators have found, state investigators have found, or foreign governments have found. So, for example, LIBOR. So LIBOR is the largest cartel that we know of course, in the history of the world by 4 orders of magnitude. We are talking about them rigging the rates on over 300 trillion. A trillion is 1,000 billion. Over $300 trillion in transactions. And there were multiple forms of this cartel over time, but they lasted for at least a decade that we know about, and they involved, it appears, at least 15 of the largest banks in the world. I say appears because that's what's in the documents. What's public already is that the government investigators have identified, I think it's about 12 of them already, but there are more shoes to drop according to the documents that show that other banks were involved as well. But it has
just a quick primer here on, I want you to continue, but the London Interbank Offered Rate, it is what sets interest rates basically globally. The entire market is something like 800 trillion, but you say 300 trillion, which is a big number, was basically rigged illegally allegedly by these banks.
Yeah, every year, roughly $330 trillion in these mostly derivatives transactions are priced off of LIBOR. And LIBOR is supposedly, as you say, a rate that banks actually charge each other for short-term borrowings, but that had nothing to do with reality. LIBOR was whatever rate, at various times, LIBOR was whatever rate made the deal make more money for you. And at other times, LIBOR was systematically rigged to reduce the interest rate so that it would make it appear that the banks could borrow money more cheaply with the idea that that would make the banks look safer, right? This is back during the crisis years. Now, maybe it sounds benign that they were reducing interest rates, but remember, this isn't real interest rates. This isn't the real rate at which they borrow. This is a game in which they report fake rates. What that meant is that all of our pension funds that bought securities that were priced off of LIBOR, we didn't get as much money as we were supposed to get.
That's a huge fraud.
Right. It's a massive fraud. And as I say, it is, as far as we can tell, 10,000 times larger than the next largest cartel in world history. And as far as we can find from the facts at this point, every large bank involved in LIBOR, in setting LIBOR, was involved in this conspiracy.
Well, let's get back to Jamie Dimon. How does he have a job? I'm not even going to talk about criminal penalties or criminal investigation on Jamie Dimon. Just how does he have a job? How do you lose the market cap of Dell Computer in a year, and you're still a darling? You're still the smartest guy in the room. Can you explain that to me?
Well, actually, of course, he could still be the smartest guy in the room. It could be a really dull room that he's in. And there's actually some indication of that. In other words, when they go through what produced the frauds and the losses, it appears that as bad as J.P. Morgan's frauds were, and again, they are epic in scale, right? Unprecedented in world history. It still appears that a very significant portion of them came from Washington Mutual and Bear Stearns. In other words, the two entities that they rushed to acquire, and they're getting good publicity. We were the darling of the government. We helped them out by acquiring these entities. The reality is that they thought they had a steal, and indeed that's what the press, in fact, the Wall Street Journal used that phrase, that they'd gotten a steal with these deals. But anyway, Washington Mutual and Bear Stearns appear to be even dirtier than J.P. Morgan. Now that, of course, is no defense of J.P. Morgan, and Dimon obviously should be fired, but why weren't there criminal actions against Washington Mutual's leadership and against Bear Stearns' leadership? By the way, Bear Stearns, the phrase used in the industry at the time was "Bear don't care." And what that meant is Bear Stearns, when it was buying mortgage-backed securities and other mortgages, could care less that it was buying crap. Why? Because all that mattered was the nominal yield. Why? Because that determined the bonuses of the officers. And yes, it was going to kill Bear Stearns, and yes, it was going to kill Washington Mutual, but those officers knew they could walk away rich, and they knew they could do it with absolute impunity from the criminal laws and effective impunity even for civil suits. So notice that in these $23 billion that you talked about, these are frauds that made Jamie Dimon and other senior officers incredibly wealthy by creating fictional income that led to very real bonuses. And notice that nobody senior is being prosecuted. They're going after two minnows in the London whale case. They're not even going after the London whale, who was instrumental not only to the losses, but to the cover-up. They're only going after two little guys, and they're not American, right? They don't go after anybody in the senior leadership of Bear Stearns or Washington Mutual or J.P. Morgan Chase, and those guys walk away rich. This is the reason George Akerlof and Paul Romer famously entitled their 1993 article, "Looting the Economic Underworld of Bankruptcy for Profit." The CEO loots Bear Stearns, Washington Mutual. It goes into bankruptcy, but they walk away wealthy, the CEOs and the other senior officers. How do they keep their jobs? Because what everybody knows, and you know, I know you're just a setup question, is that the CEO picks the board of directors, not the other way around. The CEO picks the slate that will be the board of directors and then votes the proxies that elect that slate. And all the directors know that they owe their positions to the CEO. The CEO is also smart enough to pick people who are allies. And more than that, the CEO, this is in the empirical evidence, often picks people who used to be senior officers or still are senior officers because they all have an interest in ratcheting up their compensation. And so the game is, I help you get massive compensation, then we use that as the comparables. We hire an executive pay firm, which is just a whore in all of this process, and everybody knows that they're whores, and they use whatever Jamie Dimon gets as the basis for what this CEO gets, and then they go back to J.P. Morgan and say, oh, well, you know, Jamie Dimon runs the biggest bank in the world. Surely he should be getting more than the Wells Fargo folks. And this just goes ratchet up, ratchet up, ratchet up. And the answer is you really have to do something horrific at most places to lose your job. Now, here's the irony. In the United States, the best way as one of these imperial CEOs to lose your job has nothing to do with losing money and everything to do with sleeping with the wrong person, right? That's the kind of scandals that force the CEOs out. So let's back up. Again, the frauds they led created the fictional income at the banks, led to the real bonuses, and led to the really massive losses. So the shareholders already lost twice. They lost because of the massive losses in the financial crisis, but they also lost because they had to pay all that absurd compensation to officers who were looting the bank. Now the shareholders pay a third time because that $23 billion, the number you gave, none of it, not a penny, will be paid by the officers who led the frauds and became wealthy from the frauds. They'll be paid by the shareholders. So this is the triple whammy. And even the Wall Street Journal has just ran last week a study by a University of Virginia scholar that points out there has been a massive reduction over the last decade in holding individual senior officers accountable.
And, you know, that's what I wanted to get to. I'm going to fan this out. You know, we've got scandals in money laundering. We've got scandals in funding money laundering for terrorists on the Terror Watch group. You know, we've had big banks, many of them with money laundering charges. We have rigging of the interest rate market, LIBOR, which is a huge market. And just recently, you talk about LIBOR, the top financial regulator in Germany, her name is Elke Koenig, and she said that the gold and silver market, the precious metal market, the scandal is worse than LIBOR. The market rigging is worse than LIBOR in the precious metals market. That's just unbelievable for anybody that says, "Oh no, gold and silver, they're not manipulated at all." That's not what it says here. It says her direct quote is, "It's worse than the LIBOR rigging scandal, the rigging in the precious metals market." And this is an entire global financial fraud pit. It's not just Jamie Dimon and J.P. Morgan. It seems like every major bank is engaged in some sort of money laundering, market rigging, some sort of rate rigging, some sort of felony fraud. I mean, you said it best the last time you were on, was that felons run the top financial institutions. Is it about the same, or is it getting worse? And what does that do to the system? What does all this fraud do to our system?
Right. So this in economics and criminology is called a Gresham's dynamic. And in a Gresham's dynamic, bad ethics drives good ethics out of the marketplace. Because if you gain a competitive advantage by cheating, markets will favor the cheaters. Now, we all know this in other realms because, for example, we've seen what happened in cycling, where every champion cyclist for 15 years was doping, right? Period. No guess in the story. We all know this in American baseball. We call it the steroid era, where all the top home run hitters were using steroids and such. And if you don't, you're not competitive. right? And it's called now the winner-take-all society. In other words, the rewards go overwhelmingly to just the thinnest crust of folks. Well, a winner-take-all society creates incredibly perverse incentives to become a cheater-take-all society, right? Because my chances of winning an honest competition are very poor, right? Why would I be the one guy or gal that would be the absolute best in the world? So why not cheat instead? Cheating, as Akerlof and Romer said, is a sure thing. And they were, paraphrasing what we had found as financial regulators and as criminologists. So we agree highly with it. So the absolute critical thing is a rule of law. And we've known this from the classical economic scholars, well before Adam Smith, centuries before Adam Smith. This is what they emphasized, the need for a rule of law, so that cheaters didn't prosper. And we got rid of that. We got rid of the regulatory cops on the beat, right?
In the new budget, they got less. Even, Jack Lew was complaining. Jack Lew, who's at Treasury now, he's at Treasury, and he says that, he's worried about that there's no regulators. And I think, what that tells me? When you have somebody like Jack Lew, who comes from the banking world, it tells me that, hey, whoa, we're going to implode the system. We got to have something here. Because I think what Jack Lew is really saying, it was in a USA Today article and some other things, he was complaining about no money for regulation in this latest $1.1 trillion budget. I think what he's really worried about is the system imploding. Am I wrong?
No, that's absolutely right. And you can think of Jack Lew as the anti-canary in the mines, right? So the canary obviously is supposed to be more susceptible than the miners, and it keels over first, and the carbon monoxide is in the mine, and the miners have time to get out. Jack Lew is the anti-canary because Jack Lew has been gutting regulation for virtually all of his professional life, right? He was a leader in the reinventing government insanity under then Vice President Al Gore and President Clinton, and to quote, the guy who ran the reinventing government was put in charge by Al Gore after the following statement that I'm about to make, okay? These two guys had never met, and after this meeting, Gore puts Bob Stone in charge of the reinventing government movement, and Bob Stone has written a biography about it, and he says he told Gore one substantive thing at the meeting that led to him being appointed. And that was, and I quote, "Don't waste 1 second worrying about fraud." All right? They're proud of this. They actually put it in their own books. No one has dragged this out of them, in cross-examination. Also, and I witnessed this personally as a regulator and helped decide me to leave and to go get my doctorate in criminology, we were instructed as financial regulators from the most senior ranks that we were to refer to the industry as our customer, quote unquote, and to treat them as our customer, right? So Lew was the guy at Treasury under Clinton who was a leading proponent of this. And then he got involved with OMB, where he gutted regulation. And now he's at Treasury, and Lew is saying, my God, we've gone so far, we're going to cause the collapse of the system. So yes, he's the anti-canary.
That's what he's saying. That's your read. Is that your read?
Yes. When Jack Lew keels over, you know that the carbon monoxide levels have already killed everybody reasonable.
And you think that's what he's voicing, a concern, veiled concern, that the system could be imperiled?
Oh, no, not could be. The system is ungovernable, right? Again, let's review what we've been saying. We've had the largest cartel by 4 orders of magnitude in world history, in which every major bank involved in LIBOR eagerly participated in the cartel. We have had the three worst, most destructive epidemics of accounting control fraud in world history simultaneously. Those are the two in loan origination through appraisal fraud and liar's loans, both led by the lenders. And then there ain't no such thing as a fraud exorcist. So if you got fraudulently originated loans, the only way you can sell them to the secondary market is through fraudulent reps and warranties. Right? So that's the third, the sales to the secondary market through massive fraud. We have, as you said, in addition to that, everywhere there's been a serious investigation, they have found fraud. They have found that one of the leading banks in the world, Standard Chartered, was and HSBC were not only deliberately funding and aiding the drug cartels, including among the most violent drug cartels in the world in Mexico, but also were helping Iran evade the sanctions. And I know people can vary in their views about Iran, but the administration can't. The administration claims that Iran is clearly seeking to develop a nuclear weapon and that one of the largest banks in the world eagerly assisted them in financing to do that. So my question is, why was there no criminal case? Just a fine. That is, it's obscene. Remember, we started out discussing the efforts of NSA, which were supposedly against terrorism. Here you have the worst conceivable thing you can imagine, a huge bank, according to our government, if you believe them, eagerly funding the terrorists. And they took no criminal action.
And so when you add all this together, the money laundering, the helping terrorists, the rate rigging, the gold market rigging, and why do you think, I just want a quick question, a quick comment on that. Why do you think they're rigging the gold market? Why do you think they're rigging? Obviously, the price is going down. So if, the top German financial regulator says they're rigging it, they're forcing the price down, why do you think they're doing that?
Well, first, I don't know. She didn't share the information, and we don't have the documents yet. But they rig commodity prices all the time. You're correct that they usually rig commodity prices in the upward direction, but of course, it's quite easy to have derivative positions in which you make a lot of money if gold and silver fall in price. So, that's the most obvious thing that I would investigate. If somebody actually put me in charge of investigation, which of course they will never ever do.
Well, the overall arching thing then with the system is that all this fraud and crime. The bottom line to everybody watching this is the system is weak. It will ultimately implode. Is that a correct assumption?
Well, it has already largely imploded. Let's remember that it was these three epic epidemics of accounting control fraud that drove the financial crisis and hyperinflated the bubble and caused over $13 trillion in losses just in the household sector. But you are correct, it can get much worse than this. And you can see Iceland and you can see Ireland to see examples of these things. And yes, it isn't, we've just been discussing the economics and the criminology, but of course, what happens when you make these people incredibly wealthy and allow them under Citizens United and other things to make their contributions secretly, we get the fact that big finance is now the leading political contributor to both of our major parties. And they want to be the king and queen makers, and they want to ensure that the politicians keep them with their power and keep them with the ability to loot with impunity.
So do you think that their ability to loot with impunity, as you say, could implode the system ultimately?
No, I think it already has imploded the system, and it will be bigger and worse next time. So people like me already believe that it's obvious. They've run through much of the statute of limitations. It's clear that any criminal cases they bring will be symbolic as opposed to real. Remember, we got over 1,000 felony convictions just in cases designated as major in the savings and loan crisis. And as we speak, there are still 0 prosecutions of any of the elite bankers whose frauds actually drove the crisis. So, as you say, there allegedly is one open criminal investigation on J.P. Morgan. Maybe they'll finally indict somebody out of it, but that will be completely symbolic. So people like me already believe that we have to be trying to create the solutions that might become politically acceptable in the next crisis.
Dr. Black, Professor Black, I should say, at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. You are a scholar. You are an expert in white-collar crime with your Ph.D., expert in law, expert in finance and regulation. Thank you so much for coming on today and enlightening us all about the true nature of what's going on. I appreciate that, Professor Black.
And the author of the updated book about the current crisis, The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One, which was just published January 15th, 2014.
Oh, fantastic. I'm glad you plugged your book. I will link to it in this article so people will be able to find your new book. I know The Best Way to Rob a Bank. It's a lovely title. I'm glad you just built on that, because that is exactly what's going on. The best way to rob a bank is to own one. Again, Professor Black, thank you so much for coming on USAWatchdog.com.
Thank you. It's good to be back.